Well, hello, my name is Richard Van Enck. I'm the Director of Infection Prevention and Epidemiology for Bronson Healthcare. And today we'd like to talk with you about a topic that's very exciting for us, and that is the use of COVID-19 vaccines in teenagers, because that's a new story this week. The vaccine became available for kids 12 to 15. And so it's time to talk about this topic. And we're inviting a very important pediatrician in Southwest Michigan, Dr. Megan Sikkema.
Thank you, Dr. Van Enck. So as he said, I am Megan Sikkema. I'm a pediatrician at Rambling Road Pediatrics. I also do some hospital pediatrics at Bronson Methodist Hospital in Kalamazoo.
Okay, so we'll be talking about different topics today and asking each other questions and seeing if we can stump each other. So the first question is from me to Dr. Sikkema, and the question is, can my teenager get a COVID vaccine now?
Yeah, so as of today, there are 3 different COVID-19 vaccines available for us. 2 of them are authorized for 18 years and above, and now 1 is authorized for 12 years and above. That was just yesterday. The FDA approved that. We have the final step of getting the CDC approval and getting the immunization schedule down, but we anticipate that to happen in the next 24 hours. So that now includes all of our teenagers and many of our preteens as well. So it's a very exciting time.
That's great. Why should kids get a vaccine? I mean, we've heard for a long time that kids don't really get very sick with COVID. So why do they need to get this vaccine?
Yes, that's a great question. So thankfully, the majority of COVID cases have been pretty mild in children, but we do know that they can get it and spread it very easily to other children as well as their vulnerable family members. Recently, especially with this recent surge, many of the outbreaks have occurred in groups of teenagers playing sports and getting back into their social interactions that they thrive on. So it really is an important age group to vaccinate here as soon as we're able. It's also important to note that there is a very severe inflammatory condition that can happen with kids. Also young adults we can see it in, but mainly kids, where they can get very sick with COVID or post-COVID inflammatory syndrome. So while thankfully most of it is mild, it is still a big threat for our children.
What we've seen, I think, in our patients is that sometimes a child will get a very mild infection with COVID, but some of the symptoms go on for a long time. And so it's still something that we want to protect children against.
Yeah, I also want to add too that, as long as this pandemic is here and active, it's preventing our kids from having many of the necessary social interactions that we need for their development and their mental health. So while there's the effects of COVID on our bodies, there's huge effects on our mental health too, and especially in our children. Mm-hmm. So now a question for you. Are the COVID-19 vaccines different from other vaccines that children and teenagers are already getting?
Yeah, that's kind of a yes and no question. So first of all, the no part, that is, they're not really different from any other vaccine that we give, in the sense that the purpose of it is to teach the immune system to protect itself against infectious diseases. So any vaccine is sort of like sending your immune system to school or making it attend a class so that it learns how to recognize this threat to itself and respond to it, and then we don't get the infection. So a good vaccine optimally prevents the whole infection, and that's perfect. Some vaccines are not perfect, but they won't necessarily completely prevent the infection, but they'll make the infection very mild. They'll reduce the severity of the infection because your immune system is now strong and can recognize it and can protect you against it. So that's basically what we want the vaccine to do. Now, the yes part of the question is, are these vaccines different? And they are a little bit different because the actual vaccine that goes into your body is a little bit different than any other vaccine that has been approved by the FDA so far. It's sort of a new technology for humans, although we had a vaccine like this before for SARS, and it was very effective. So this is not the first vaccine like this that we've had. We just haven't had to use it widely. So it's not new technology. It is very well tested, but this is the first time that we've used this technology that we call mRNA technology in a human vaccine on such a large scale. So we think that this technology is probably going to become the standard for new vaccines because it's much better, it's much safer, and it's much faster than the old technology. So I would anticipate that many new vaccines will be made using this technology, and some of the older vaccines might be converted to this technology. For instance, flu shots might be made using this new technology. So it's both old and new.
That's great, thank you. Can you talk a little bit about how effective the COVID-19 vaccines are in our teenagers?
Yeah, these vaccines are extremely effective. If you look at all vaccines, you know, their effectiveness varies in terms of their ability to prevent disease, from maybe 60% for the flu vaccine to maybe, you know, in the mid to high 90s for the HPV vaccine. But this vaccine is way at the top of all of the vaccines that we have in both safety and effectiveness. So it's one of the most effective vaccines we've ever had in the country. And the clinical trial for the 12 to 15-year-old kids actually had better results than in adults. So it looks like the vaccine is working at least as well or better in the teenagers than it is in adults. So that's very exciting.
Yes, it is. I think something I hear often is, you know, were these vaccines adequately tested for children for both safety and effectiveness? And then concerns about them being rushed through production and development. Can you talk a little bit about those things for us?
Yeah, we do clinical trials for vaccines, of course, and so we calculate adequate numbers of patients that get either the vaccine in the clinical trial or what we call a placebo, which is sort of like a fake vaccine. It's an injection, but it doesn't contain the vaccine. So that's a comparison between the drug and the people that didn't get the drug, and everything else is the same. We had very large numbers, thousands of kids were in those clinical trials. And so we have good data on safety and the effectiveness of these vaccines. And then if you add in the clinical trials and the actual usage of these vaccines in the world, right now we're about 150 million people. And so we have data on 150 million people. That's a huge database. That's a tremendous amount of knowledge that we have about these drugs, probably more than any other drug that we've ever looked at. So we have a huge amount of safety data on these drugs. So what do they cause in terms of side effects? Well, they basically do the same thing that other vaccines do. That is, they turn on your immune system. So what does it feel like to have your immune system activated? Well, first of all, of course, your arm is going to be a little bit sore where you put the needle in. So we'll have soreness at the site of the injection. Then as your immune system gets turned on, it makes you feel in a certain way. So you might feel a little bit tired, you might feel a little bit warm, you might feel chilled, you might have a little bit of a headache, and that means your immune system is reacting to the vaccine. So these vaccines, these COVID vaccines, do the same thing that other vaccines do, and we would call those side effects. Now, another question related to that is, does the vaccine cause harm in anyone? Does it hurt you in any way? Not the normal side effects, but does it harm you in any way? And the answer is no. we haven't been able to find any harm that we've ever done to a patient because of these vaccines. So that kind of addresses the safety issue.
All right, great, thank you. So I've heard some people say some bad and scary thing about the COVID vaccines. I just wanted to point out a couple of those. So COVID-19 vaccines cannot give you COVID. A big thing that I hear is, does it affect DNA, development, chromosomes, genetics, all of those things? And it's important to note that we have no evidence to suggest that right now. And the messenger RNA that is used does not do anything to our DNA or our chromosomes. So I like to make sure that families know that as we think about adolescents going through puberty and developing into adulthood, that it should not have any effect on that. Fertility, that's a big question that we get asked, and with teens, menstruation, and there's no evidence to suggest that it does anything for your fertility. It will not harm pregnant people or their unborn baby, and then it does not cause Bell's palsy, Guillain-Barré syndrome, or autism. So again, lots of things that you can hear in searching the media, and those just aren't concerns of ours right now.
Those are all things that we're looking for too, and we just haven't found them. One of the interesting things about those conditions is that the disease itself also causes those conditions. And so by preventing the disease, you actually prevent those conditions instead of cause them. So vaccines are actually good for those particular conditions because they're protective.
Yeah, one of the things I like to think about is a vaccine gives instructions to the body, and it's a very controlled exposure to just the instructions for the virus, whereas the virus itself is a very uncontrolled exposure. So that virus is allowed to replicate inside of us and wreak havoc in ways that we can't control. And so it's important to think about the vaccine as giving your body instructions and having it be very, very controlled rather than the virus itself.
Mm-hmm. Can I go back a minute, Dr. Sikkema, and talk about the issue of the speed of production or the speed of development of this vaccine? I think I forgot to answer your question because I got so excited about the other question. People say that it was rushed into production. And in a sense, the vaccine was developed quickly. That is true, but it was not rushed. And the issue is that when any drug is developed, there's a process that we use to develop that drug, and there's different steps. And sometimes there's delays during those steps. And what the pharmaceutical companies and the FDA have been able to do is work together to eliminate those delays. And so every step in the production and development happened as fast as it could rather than waiting for some delays. And so by removing all of those barriers and the delays, the production progressed much quicker than it normally does. So was this unusual? Well, it was a good experiment to try this new fast track process. But I think that all drugs will be developed now in this faster way because it's much better and faster, and it's less expensive. You know, time is money. And so if you can do something faster, that's always better. So these drugs were not rushed into production, and there were no corners that were cut. All of the proper studies were done. And so there was nothing missing in the development of these drugs.
Thank you. Thanks for circling back to that. Can you go through some things that we can do now if we take the vaccine that we maybe couldn't do a couple of months ago when it wasn't available to us?
Yeah. When you take the vaccine, you yourself are protected from COVID. And to a large extent, maybe not completely, but to a large extent, you're not likely to transmit it to someone else. That means you can do things socially that we couldn't do before. They're much safer now. So for instance, if you're outside and you're not all crowded together with a group of people, you don't have to wear a face mask anymore because you're much less likely to have the virus in your nose and your mouth. So that's a good thing. If you're an athlete, if you play sports in Michigan, we've had rules about testing, right? You had to be tested, either periodically, once a week or every other day, or you had to be tested before games or before certain practices. And now you don't have to do that anymore if you're immunized, because you're not likely to be infected. You can spend time indoors without masks with other people that are also immunized. So if you're having a social gathering with your family or something like that, or if you're thinking about going to college and living in a dorm, if you're immunized, then it's much easier because the risk goes way down. And if you're exposed to COVID before the vaccine, you had to quarantine. That is, you had to stay home and you couldn't play a sport or things like that. Now, if you're vaccinated, you don't have to do that. So there's a whole lot of things now that we can do more freely, more normally, that we were not able to do before. And it looks like a lot of new things will be coming in the future.
Great, thank you.
So when should teenagers be immunized?
Yeah, so the sooner the better. As I said, I think some places are even starting to schedule these 12 and up now. Bronson is planning on doing it in the next 24 hours or so, as long as that last final approval happens. So contact local pharmacies, get on your Bronson MyChart and get them scheduled. Every day someone is unprotected is a day that they could spread to family members or other loved ones or their friends, their sports, their teammates. So every day matters. If they can get vaccinated now, they can have a safe summer. They can hopefully return to school in the fall and get back to what their life was like before this all started. So just make an appointment, get a plan, and get moving on that vaccine. The one that's approved for teenagers now, there's 2 doses. They need to be 3 or 4 weeks apart. And so after about a week after that second dose, we have pretty good immunity, but after 2 weeks, they're set and it's considered full protection.
I got another question. If my teenager is immunized, are they going to behave differently that night? Are they going to be normal, or what could I expect in terms of behavioral changes, or how are they going to feel? What are we going to have to deal with if my teenager gets immunized?
Yeah, great question. So most of them will be completely normal. As you did a great job explaining, some arm soreness may be present. They may be a little bit more tired the next day. But if you go into it with a positive attitude and express, gratitude for them for making this decision and make it a non-anxiety provoking experience, then they usually do really, really well with it. Sometimes their immune system kicks into gear and they may have a fever or be a little bit more down and out, but we're seeing that a lot less in the kids than we were in the adults. So, yeah.
Good. So as a pediatrician, do you want your patients to talk to you first and get your permission to get immunized? Or when do you think it's proper to talk to the teenager's doctor before they get this immunization?
Yeah, so we're always happy to talk to any of our patients' families if you're considering the vaccine, or certainly if there's any hesitation or specific questions about your teenager. But in general, there is no reason that you need our approval, and there's really no medical condition that would point us to say that your child shouldn't be vaccinated. There are some timing of medications and other vaccines that can be considered, but there's not a reason to have to talk to us beforehand unless there's some hesitation.
Okay, here's the most important question. If you had a teenager, would you vaccinate your own teenager?
Yes, so that is a hard yes. My kids are a little bit younger and I'm anxiously awaiting that age group to be lowered. So certainly yes.
All right, well, this has been really fun. Thanks for spending a few minutes with me.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you for all of your information.
All right.